Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this webinar today on religion and resettlement. I'm Tony Kube with the Justice for Immigrants campaign. We have some great presenters today. They're experts in their field. The one item I did want to mention to folks on the webinar is that if there's anyone with the press on this webinar, this webinar is intended as a resource for the Justice for Immigrants network around the country. So if you have any further questions, please contact Mark Priceman. His email should be, you should be able to see it on your screen there. It's in blue. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Todd Scribner, to start the webinar in earnest. Todd, go ahead, please.
Hey, thanks, Tony. You can just switch it to the next slide, I think would be okay.
Okay.
Great. So I just want to take an opportunity, first of all, thanks to Tony, thanks for those who are joining us for this webinar, and thanks to the participants who I'm going to introduce in just a second. It's always a pleasure to have an opportunity to do this sort of thing and talk to the network and get feedback, and that's going to be particularly important, I think, today, both feedback today, but also as we move forward into the future, and hopefully you'll better understand why as we move through this webinar. The webinar itself, in terms of participants, is myself. I'm Todd Scribner. I work in the policy office here at Migration and Refugee Services at the Bishops' Conference. I'm joined today by Patrick Berry, who's a program director of Immigration and Refugee Services in Camden, New Jersey. Matthew Weiner, who is a doctor. He's an associate dean in the Office of Religious Life at Princeton University. Catherine Clifton, who's the coordinator for religion and forced migration in the Office of Religious Life at Princeton University. We're sort of coordinating with them a long-term project with respect to religion and refugee resettlement. Matt, in particular, is going to give a little bit more of the background in just a few minutes, and Catherine's going to go into some of the details. Well, Patrick Berry provides kind of an on-the-ground perspective. He was involved in a recent symposium that we had on this topic of the way in which religion sort of affects integration of refugees, asylees, SIVs upon their arrival in the United States. And we'll get into the details of that, what we mean by that in a little bit. But first, just the overview. This is what we're going to do over the next hour. Provide a little background, talk about our respective organizations and why we got involved in this specific project, and then really delve into some of the objectives and kind of the mechanisms that we're using in order to move the project forward. And then, as I mentioned, Patrick Berry is going to give kind of a testimonial perspectives on the, on how he's engaged on this issue on the local level. And hopefully talk a little bit about the symposium and why he thinks it's important that we, have this religion and resettlement project moving forward over the next couple of years. So I'm going to turn over to Matt right now, and Tony, you can go to the next slide. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Todd. Greetings, everyone. This is the first time that I've been on a webinar in any form, so it's exciting for me. So I'm just going to give just a few words in terms of a background, in terms of how this project got started, because I think it's interesting for the overall picture. We started working on this topic of forced migration in 2016. In 2017, we had a couple of different conferences. We put together a conference called Seeking Refuge, which involved about 300 scholars, activists, agency representatives, UN officials, kind of international group of people to think about the problems of forced migration. We did so because our job is to kind of respond to the world around us and the problems around us, and to do that from the perspective of the university that we're at. That led us to more deeply kind of notice the particular kind of questions about the role that religion plays when thinking about forced migration in any number of ways. And to a partnership with USCCB and IRC, we put together a policy forum specifically looking at the role that religion plays in in refugee resettlement here in this country. That was really successful. We had only 30 or 40 people, but we really noticed it to be a kind of important topic, an important gap in terms of knowledge in a bunch of ways that we'll get into in a minute. And then that led us to receiving a grant. It was offered to us from the Luz Foundation. Luz Foundation kind of noticed what we were doing, thought it was important, gave us a 3-year grant to work specifically on kind of better understanding the role that religion plays in forced migration broadly. And then we'll talk specifically about the resettlement piece of that. Just the other thing to say about this in terms of this issue of background is just thinking specifically about the gap in terms of understanding religion in a diverse set of ways. Thinking about the kinds of partnerships that can be put together when we're coming from the perspective of a university or an office of religious life, both the different kinds of partnerships and the different ways that disciplines can work together that they might not ordinarily work together when people are in their own particular kind of professional facets when working on this topic. And then lastly, in terms of background, what's the role that a university plays in this? A university is not a place that's kind of inherently expert on this topic. But that doesn't mean that we don't kind of can play a role, and how we partner and how we think about that is kind of the thing that we're trying to answer as we're going through. Next slide. So then just to say a word about the Office of Religious Life, why the Office of Religious Life, why do we get involved in a topic like this? And there's a bunch of different ways we can answer that, but the way we like to start off is always say, like, what's the role of chaplaincy or an Office of Religious Life on a secular campus, and maybe in particular a campus like Princeton University that is kind of particular in many of its own ways? Start off just by saying that before working at the Office of Religious Life at Princeton, I was involved in what could be called religious literacy training in New York City. We worked at the UN with different social work agencies and schools, with NYPD. In all these cases, we're working with secular institutions that have a job to do in terms of a problem in the world. And because they're secular, they don't see religion as a piece of the thing that they need to understand to do their job better. And yet, really, when you're dealing with any problem, when you're dealing with communities and people tend to be religious. And so understanding religion, both on a kind of social, moral level and on an individual level, helps people who are doing their work, just helps them to do their job better in all these different kinds of ways. So we can think about it both in terms of religious literacy, understanding religion, but also in terms of partnering with religious communities as a way of kind of getting being able to kind of work on their particular problems. And so that's talking about kind of religion as a social moral force. Whether you like religion or not, believe it or not, is really besides the point. It's rather understanding it allows you to partner better and to do your job better. And then that's one side of the kind of why religion and why our office. But you could almost think about that in a very secular way, which is what we imagine when we're working with our different partners. And then another way to think about religion is, hey, wait a minute, we're chaplains. We're spiritual religious people ourselves. And so we think about how do we respond to the world around us? How do we work with students who are on a vocational journey instead of just thinking about it in terms of career development with students? Is think about what are students called to do and moved to do, and how do they want to shape their lives and working to make the world a better place? And that's like very central to our work as chaplains, that idea of vocation. And then finally, we really see it essential to say when we're going to be working on a topic or a problem, what does that do to the institution we're in, and how do we think about transforming the institution we're in and making it a more, we could say, compassionate place? And when we work on a topic like this, that's a piece of what we're trying to do. We're trying to work on this problem with all of you, but we're also thinking about how does that change the institution that we're in. Next slide.
Great. Thanks so much, Matt. That's really helpful. And really now, why the USCCB? Why are we involved in this project? And I'm going to expand a little bit about the substance of the project in a minute, just to give you all a little bit more focus. But this is kind of old news, obviously. When it comes to refugees, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, and our office in particular, Migration and Refugee Services, has been involved in that area for quite some time. Formally, really, in the post-World War II period, up through the following decades with the passage of the 1980 Refugee Act, became really formally involved in engaging and resettling refugees once they came to the United States. And part of that effort of a number of different parts, but one aspect of this engagement is really a focus on refugee integration. If you look back at the Refugee Act of 1980, one of the important components of that piece of legislation was an emphasis on self-sufficiency. It was a key component expressed that sort of defined the success of the program. It was a sort of a measurable, how quickly could we make refugees self-sufficient? That means really standing on their own, providing for themselves, providing for their family, not being dependent upon, government funding, government, the welfare programs, that sort of thing. And that's certainly a really important first step in the process of integrating into the United States, that you can economically provide for yourself and, you're kind of self-standing and self-supporting. But really, economics is not enough. And really, from our faith perspective, we've recognized that for a really long time. But on, sort of building on Matt's point, religion is also a key component of how integration, really for migrants in general, whether you're talking about refugees or immigrants or, other subgroups, actually occurs. And we are focusing on refugees as one subset of and asylees as sort of one subset of sort of the migrant population, with the direct purpose of understanding what is the role of religion in this process. And what do I mean by that? I mean a couple of things in brief. First, what kind of religious kind of symbols, narratives, institutions, and other structures do refugees rely on following their arrival, and particularly here in the U.S.? Do they appeal to mosques and churches and synagogues or not? Is their faith strengthened through this process, or is it weakened? Do they convert from one religion to another? How does this whole kind of dynamic in terms of their religious life play out within the context of their, quote-unquote, becoming American? And, how does it inhibit? How does it help? So I think that's a really important question. But another aspect, it's not just simply how do refugees use religious resources in the process of integration into the United States. It's also how does religion affect the local community's response? This is a particularly important question, I think, now that migration has become a very antagonistic and almost partisan kind of subject area. Some local communities welcome refugees with open arms. The welcome the stranger kind of ethic is really front and center. Other communities are a bit more hesitant to welcome refugees. They're a bit more adversarial. And they sometimes use religious language or religious narratives or religious frameworks to make sense of that kind of response to refugees. And so, given the faith-based nature of the conference and with the organizations that we oftentimes collaborate with, we thought this was a really important kind of field to explore more intentionally. One last point, really on sort of the bigger picture, that we're working with Princeton, which is a great opportunity, and it's been a pleasure over the past couple of years with Matt and Catherine. But really what it has helped us see as well, kind of sort of moving a little bit away from the substance of this particular project, is really the importance of cross-collaboration. We do a lot of cross-collaboration in various coalitions here in Washington, D.C., and some of you might be involved in the Justice for Immigrants campaign, the Interfaith Immigration Coalition, or other kind of coalitions that we work on advocacy and do different things. But it's also become apparent to us that organizing engaging projects with non-advocacy kind of institutions is really important too. And universities are one of them. They bring a set of strengths and skill sets that we don't necessarily have. their kind of academic foundations, their research abilities, the students that they can draw on to do some really critical thinking and some really exciting work in the field that any given project might be focused on, is really an important resource that we don't necessarily have, but we bring other resources that they don't have. Where we're centrally located in Washington, D.C., when it comes to advocacy, when it comes to our expertise in areas of policy that may be absent in universities or at least understood in different ways. And so, so that kind of gives you, hopefully a fairly helpful overview on why USCCB is involved in this project and why we're looking forward to continuing it over the next couple of years. Thanks, Tony. You can move into the next slide.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Clifton, and I'm coordinating the Religion and Resettlement Project at this Office of Religious Life. Thanks for being on the call. And in the future, if you're interested in hearing more about our work or getting involved in any way, please do reach out to me because I'd be delighted to speak with you and hear about ways our project could be useful to your work, to your community. Okay, so with objectives, the main objective is what Matt and Todd have already, mentioned. Most refugees identify as religious and represent the plurality of the world's religions. And as you all know, most refugees in the U.S. are resettled by faith-based organizations, and much of the longer-term support that they receive has a faith-based component. But there haven't been systematic studies or trainings or initiatives to address this interplay of religion and resettlement. And our project is designed to respond to this gap to strengthen refugee services and the resettlement system at large. So another significant outcome for us is creating a robust network of scholars and practitioners and refugees, faith leaders, and others around the topics of resettlement, integration, and religion. And we aim to increase the literacy in religious identities and lived experiences of refugees by both scholars and practitioners. And we also aim for a richer understanding of interfaith organizing and collaboration at and among the resettlement agencies, religious and secular. And ultimately, we think that this will open up channels of conversation between practitioners and scholars. Next slide, please. Thank you. So one of our main initiatives is this oral history project on religion and resettlement. And it's a developing archive of oral histories from resettled refugees in the U.S. whose religious and spiritual lives have been consequential in their displacement, in their resettlement, and or in their integration into the U.S. And we will gather and share these oral histories over the next 2.5 years. I don't think it's been said yet that this is a 3-year project from the Luce Foundation. If it has, my bad, and repeating, but we're about 7 months in, so we still have a couple of years to go. And we're really committed to collecting stories from and involving the full range of religious and refugee communities. You know, we recognize, as Todd was saying, that the religious and spiritual lives of refugees, it's critical to understanding their experiences, and that their personal stories through oral history are a good way for them to share and for everyone to learn about that. And so we think that this archive, we will make this archive an open access archive so it can be used by scholars and resettlement agencies and refugees and artists and interested citizens, really by everyone. It will be housed online at Princeton University's Mudd Library, and eventually we're hoping to host it on an online platform that will also feature, reports and articles that we've drawn from our other projects. This archive really helps to preserve histories of newcomers at a time when, the government has significantly rolled back its resettlement capacity, and the future of the resettlement program is unclear. And it will provide an opportunity for further civic engagement, participation with and for refugees, as well as enhancing spaces of dialogue, of listening, of chaplaincy across the country. And it's so far been led by undergraduate students. So they've been trained in oral history methodology and practice. About 15 of them from Princeton will spend the summer interning at faith-based kind of forced migration NGOs in different capacities, and all of them will be collecting oral histories of resettled refugees in their communities. Other students will join in the fall. And we're absolutely open to expanding this network of oral historians to collect as many diverse stories as possible. This will really help to educate students and others in university context about the lives of refugees and the civic and moral significance of religion in refugees' lives. We'll be partnering with on-campus historians and poets and theater makers to bring these oral histories to life in creative ways as well, which is exciting. And if this appeals to you, we could definitely imagine ways to partner with churches or faith-based organizations by training individuals in your offices or in your communities, or by sending one of our student oral historians to collect histories. And we think that this will serve as a really rich archive for your own, sites, your own communities, to document the work that you're doing and the people who populate your community, and for all of us collectively. So, yes, happy to talk more about that, because we have a lot of ideas there. Next slide, please. Okay, and the primary undertaking of this project, of this Religion and Resettlement project, is to convene representatives from all 9 resettlement agencies, and also those who are providing longer-term support for refugees, to explore the multifaceted ways in which religion affects displacement, resettlement, and integration. We held our inaugural symposium in March on Princeton's campus and plan to hold the next one in October, and we will do a total of, we think, 3 more. This symposium aimed to reconfigure the resettlement agency's approach to religion in their work by helping to develop an awareness of, an appreciation for, and a sensitivity to the interplay of religion and resettlement. So through open dialogue, we examined religion's role in resettlement socially and structurally, and participants had lots of opportunities to share their own experiences and ask each other questions and brainstorm ways to situate what they've gleaned in their work. And our panelists, who we refer to as faculty, were refugees and faith leaders and NGO directors, and often individuals who represented kind of more than one of those groups. We included an oral history training in this symposium to teach the participants basic, theoretical and practical methods of oral history, with the goal of having those participants return to their agencies interested in carrying out oral history collection. And our first symposium really went even better than we could have imagined, with just really rich conversation and helpful examples of exactly what we're trying to figure out. And our reports from this symposium, from other events, from future symposia, these will form the basis for one of our kind of final initiatives, which is a substantial quantitative and qualitative policy report to be circulated with several departments of the government and with NGOs and policymakers, think tanks, and others. And so similarly with the Oral History Project, if this symposium appeals to you, we'd love to share more about it and hear whether it would be useful to you or someone in your office. And as Todd mentioned, Patrick Berry from Camden, who will speak at the end of the webinar, attended this inaugural symposium, and so he can offer his thoughts as a participant. So that's all for me. Next slide, please.
Right, so just a few words about partnerships. The Office of Religious Life really in particular thinks about partnerships very seriously, and we think about them both in terms of how do we, as I was saying before, we kind of joke that we're the Princeton is this kind of bubble. So how do we partner with other institutions, other organizations, other people in a way that enhances what we're doing and what we're learning, as well as the resources we might be able to share. And we also really genuinely think about it in terms of friendship. We probably do that a little differently than other parts of the institution because we're an Office of Religious Life and because we're chaplains. But we take that idea really seriously. And then for us, we try to think of partnerships in terms of just paying careful attention to what's going on around us and listening to what people have to offer and suggest. And really interesting partnerships have come out of just that kind of posture, if that's a good way to put it. So just a couple of examples. In conversation with different people from resettlement agencies that we become friends with, when we've been sharing our ideas, people have come to us with their own ideas and said, oh, would you be interested in, would you be able to be helpful in this way? Which is not exactly on topic in terms of our grant, but might be a way that we can help anyway. And we've tried to do that, and to some degree we've been successful. So just a quick example to give is we're in conversation with friends at the Archdiocese of New York. They do a large amount of asylum work. They're in need of expert witnesses for their asylum hearings. We happen to have a lot of expert witnesses because we're a university with scholars who are experts on different countries and different kind of human rights problems. And so with a group of about 15 students, we've created this little asylum kind of project where we've been matching scholars with lawyers in their particular cases. That's something that we didn't set out to do. It was just something that somebody said, someone kind of looked at us and said, oh, you have these kinds of resources, and we thought, oh, this is a great opportunity to be helpful, to educate our students, to involve faculty who might be too thick in their scholarship, who think that they want to be helpful to the world but don't necessarily get there. And so Princeton is very interested on an institutional level in service. It's kind of part of our motto. And then for us, as an Office of Religious Life, we want to think about how can we respond and be involved in service in ways that are kind of particular to what we have to offer. Patrick Berry will say something about the partnership we have with him, but it's a similar kind of situation. We have students who are really interested in doing service. I reached out to Patrick because Camden is very close to Princeton. Princeton and Camden are entirely different worlds, even if they're only 15 minutes apart. And then we've had this 3-year partnership that's been really fruitful for both of us. And then I think, lastly, just to say we have a lot of students that do internships over the summer. A lot of students go and do kind of non-service internship kind of things over the summer, but a lot of students are really interested in service as well. And so then when we do service-based internships, especially when it comes to this project and forced migration and refugees in particular, we want to think about it as relationship building and institutional relationship building as opposed to just internships, as opposed to a student just going and doing an internship for 8 weeks, learning something, being a little helpful. The idea is to say we're going to actually try to develop a partnership between our office and, say, the Archdiocese of New York through a student who's going to be working there. And so thinking about internships as partnerships as well. Next slide. Oh, so I think this is Patrick.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Just a little bit about myself. I'm the Director of Refugee and Immigration Services at Catholic Charities, Diocese of Camden. I first stepped into this role back in 2015, and since then there has been an issue as far as the reality of the conversation about the Muslim ban. So I just want to brief everyone on that. So I'm just going to give a couple examples as far as my experience with refugee resettlement and religion. The first example is a case where a Pakistani refugee family arrived, and I reached out to my contacts. I was caught off guard, where some of my contacts who had helped other Muslim families had described them as not being real Muslims. And that really kind of surprised me. Fortunately, we were able to reach out to some other mosques that were able to help them out, both spiritually and as far as integration and financial support. But the Pakistani family were part of a Muslim minority group back home, and that is actually one of the reasons as to why they were forced to leave their home country. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, there we go. So the next case, we had assisted a tremendous number of Burmese individuals back in basically from 2010 all the way to 2015, where we had an influx of hundreds of Burmese refugees that we resettled. Fortunately, we were able to partner with a Catholic church that was able to open up to them. But one of the unique experiences was the influx was so enormous, there was some pushback as far as, you know, are these the right people? It also coincided with an influx of Spanish-speaking individuals in the community as well. So me and my staff campaigned and advocated and did a lot of kind of town hall meetings to kind of ease the, I would describe as kind of xenophobic viewpoints. But fortunately, that church has been a tremendous beacon of hope for many of our Burmese refugees. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned a bit earlier, there is the language of the Muslim ban, which started in 2015, carried through 2016, and then was made official in 2017. Fortunately, I was able to reach out and network with the local religious leaders, Muslim, Jewish, Catholic. We were able to quickly come together and assist several hundred in a brief period of time. One thing that I found out was, you know, there's a degree of goodwill, which is fantastic, but if it's not planned, it can get a little bit difficult. So it was a very unique experience where we had overwhelming support to the Syrian refugees. There's a case where we actually had a family receive 2 semi-brand new cars, which is amazing. But at the same time, there are some other issues at hand that we were able to, you know, help out as far as religious services and just communicating better with the 3 separate communities. Those 3 particular cases were diverse enough where I wanted to share with everyone about religion and resettlement and integration. I have far more stories to share. My refugees do, and everyone here at Catholic Charities is really excited to get started. So thank you.
And that was the last slide.
There should be one more, I think. Contact information? Is there a contact information slide?
I'm sorry, there isn't, Todd.
Okay, no, that's fine. So the Tony, in a follow-up email, a couple of closing thoughts. I just want to thank everyone who was on this, this webinar today. You know, Matt and Catherine and Patrick. Really appreciate your time. And I also we can take questions if people have them. So please feel free to chat in your questions if you have anything that you want to add. You know, I think one of the things we really wanted to highlight are a couple of things that I think are important. Is first, we really want to establish new partnerships with you all in this kind of initiative because as Matt sort of pointed out, we don't really know where these partnerships are going to go once they're made. You know, I was brought on early on when planning for the policy forum. Kind of randomly, I didn't know what to expect, and lo and behold, 2 years later, you know, Matt and Catherine and I talk once a week about how we can move this project forward, at least once a week, and you know, it's really turned into a vibrant relationship. So if any of you are in a position or have the interest to, you know, collaborate with us in any way on this kind of a project with an open mind as to where it could go, you know, perhaps in a very different relationship or different direction rather, in this relationship, that would be fantastic. And you can, Tony, I think I'll ask him to send the contact information to you all. for each of us so that you can reach out to us individually. Really, we would also urge you to, if you have any thoughts or ideas about, areas that we might want to focus on that we haven't thought about perhaps yet, please feel free to reach out in that regard. If you can help us to connect interns with, refugees who might be interested in speaking to them for this oral history, that would be fantastic as well. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to chime in, and otherwise we look forward to continuing this relationship moving forward.
Folks, I think you have the capability to ask questions on this webinar. So why don't you go ahead and you may have muted yourself on your own. So if you need to unmute, go ahead, and these experts on the webinar can take any questions you folks may have. I may be wrong, but it doesn't seem as if there's any questions, Todd, for you and your presenters.
Okay, not a problem at all. Again, Tony will send our contact information out, and if you have thoughts as you're kind of pondering this webinar late at night tonight, feel free to reach out then. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to our presenters, and hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the week. Take care, all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.